Hi Year 11, it's Mrs. Reed here, and we're just going to get started with the second of our recap videos. This one is looking at word classes, and it's a particularly useful revision linked to Paper 1 Question 2 and Paper 2 Question 3. Okay, so for the purpose of this revision video, we're going to focus on 4 word classes. Now there are other word classes that we could discuss, but I think for revision purposes, these 4 are sufficient really in giving you enough to be able to label and to talk about confidently in the exam. So we'll be looking at nouns, adjectives, verbs and adverbs. We'll be looking at a definition of each one. We'll be looking at how you can test if a word is that particular word class, some examples, and we'll finish with a practice activity. Okay, so let's start with nouns. So nouns are labels, they name things. So nouns label people, places, things and objects, as well as ideas and feelings. A good way to test if a word is a noun is to ask, what is it? If we can answer with it is a pen, it is a car, it is a phone, we can see here that we're naming an object and we know it's a noun. Another way to test this would be to ask the question, who is it? Okay, it is Mum, for example. Okay, it is my sister. A noun can also work in the following phrase. We can use the determinant the, a, or an. So we might say the car, a dog, an apple. There are other ways to categorise nouns too. So I'm just going to talk briefly about 4 different categories. The first is proper nouns. So proper nouns we can see name a place or a person. In fact, a proper noun will always use a capital letter. So Tor Point as a location and London as well will use capital letters at the start and be a proper noun, the name of a place. For me, my name, Mrs. Reed, you can see uses 2 capital letters. So your first name and your surname will also be proper nouns. And other significant locations, perhaps names of companies, our school, for example, Tor Point Community College, they will also be proper nouns. We also have what we call concrete nouns. So concrete nouns are names of things that we can visibly see and touch. So they'll be our everyday type objects, a car, a pen, a ball, a potato, even a jumper. Common nouns are linked to our concrete nouns. So common nouns just give a more generalised category of an object. So rather than specifically a potato, a common noun would be a vegetable or an animal, clothing, teacher or schools. Abstract nouns then are different. They are things that we cannot physically be touched or seen. So abstract nouns might help to convey feelings or bigger concepts like love, bravery, luck, beauty or sorrow. In another recap video where I focus on connotations, I will talk more specifically about the differences between our concrete and abstract nouns and why abstract nouns are really helpful to us in analysing language. Okay, next we have adjectives. So adjectives are our describing words. They're words or phrases that modify a noun and they'll expand to create noun phrases. Adjectives will describe the characteristics of a noun, so the colour of something, its texture or size, perhaps more specifically what it tastes like or smells like. A good way to test if a word is an adjective is to ask, what is it like? And then you can see, will it fit in the following structures? So, what is it like? Okay, it is let's pick a colour first. It is a blue jumper. It is a fluffy jumper. Okay, and I can test and fit it into this structure. So the noun is X. Okay, in this case, let's use my pet here. The dog is black. The dog is scruffy. I've created some categories here for using adjectives, and these can be useful not just in analysing language but also in constructing your own descriptions. So adjectives might refer to the senses. They do really help to create precise and more powerful imagery. They might appeal to our sense of sight, for example, or even smell or taste. Adjectives can also describe feelings, so they can be useful when describing a character. Paying attention to how the writer might describe the character, whether they're feeling confident or irritable that day. Is the character's behaviour perhaps showing us something about their mood? Maybe they're feeling defeated or ashamed. So they can be used to convey both positive and negative feelings. Adjectives can also describe the size of something, give us a sense of its power or weakness, its strength. So they might show us that something is huge, it's colossal, immense. But maybe on the opposite side, then something that is very small, it's meagre or petite, perhaps weak and puny. Adjectives can also be linked to time. So looking within a text, you might look at, is something being described in terms of its age? It's particularly ancient, or is it contemporary, modern? Perhaps we get a sense of how quickly things happen, so maybe something is described as being brief or swift. Okay, on to our verbs. Verbs are outdoing words. Okay, they are words that describe actions. These actions can be both external and internal. To test if a word is a verb, it's worthwhile asking, what are they or it doing? If we can answer that question, then we have a verb. Verbs will start with the word to, so we might say to sit, to stand, to walk. Those are all those external actions, things that we can do. But they can be internal as well, perhaps to contemplate, to think, to reflect. So I've created some categories again to help us to revise some verbs and also ones that are helpful to look for in the text. So verbs that convey movements are going to be important, looking at what a character is doing, how they react and respond to things, whether their verbs are in the past or in the present tense. Verbs can also tell us how a character speaks, so they can convey precise details about voice. They can tell us whether a character is shouting or screaming, or perhaps are talking very quietly in a whisper. Verbs can also be useful for understanding emotions. A character might be described as admiring something perhaps, or despairing, even wincing if something is painful. again, they can create very precise images and help to convey meaning to the audience. Verbs can also convey thoughts, whether your character might be daydreaming or wondering about something. There are two other types of verbs that I want to focus on here: modal verbs and imperative verbs. Modal verbs tell us the degree of possibility or a degree of certainty of something happening. So some examples are might or may, could. And we can see that they suggest something a bit tentative. It may happen, we're not quite sure yet. But they can also, at the other end of the scale, suggest something that should definitely happen or not. So it must happen, it will, or it should not, or cannot. I think modal verbs are useful for being able to identify, particularly in non-fiction texts. They might help you to understand a writer's opinion or viewpoint. Imperative verbs, sometimes referred to as bossy verbs, give a command. Typically, they come at the start of a sentence. Imperative verbs can also be highly useful in identifying meaning in both fiction, I think, and non-fiction. So whether a character is showing their a sense of authority, perhaps. Maybe they're acting and behaving in a more dominant manner. They also come through in more instructional texts, such as recipes, for example. Anything that needs to give directions is going to use an imperative. Okay, on to adverbs. Adverbs modify verbs, and they do this by qualifying how things are done, how often things are done, when and where things are done. So adverbs can come before or after the verb in a sentence. To test if a word is an adverb, ask, how is it being done? How often? When? Or where? If we can answer these things with the word, then we're sure to have an adverb. Helpfully, in identifying adverbs, many of them end in ly. So that can be useful when trying to spot them in a text. Okay, so here's some examples. Adverbs can give precision to descriptions of movement. They might help to explain how a character is behaving. Maybe they're behaving in a cruel or manner, so cruelly or defiantly. Again, they can help to show whether something is being presented positively or negatively. So we have those more uplifting adverbs like gracefully, happily, gently, against those that are more serious, solemnly. They can tell us when something happens. This can be very useful for understanding the order of events in a text. They can tell us how often something happens, whether it's once or never. And they can also tell us where actions take place. Okay, I think it's really important that you have your definitions, some examples for each of those word classes. And equally important is applying that, actually making sure you're testing yourself by labelling word classes often and checking against those questions to test whether or not that word fits that particular category. Finally, then, I want to say, well, why revise this? Why is it important? Well, we know for the language papers, good knowledge of language and application of precise subject terminology is helpful in terms of gaining marks. So There are things that each of these word classes do and are responsible for that help us to show we understand language. So nouns are important for creating imagery. If we can name something is being named and labelled, then we are able to picture it as an object. A writer's choice of nouns can be really significant. They might choose to include lots of nouns to create an image for us. They might choose to omit certain information. So, for example, they may choose to give a precise name to a character, or they might choose to not name them at all. Nouns can be replaced with pronouns. Now, this might be to avoid repetition, so using he, she, it, they, as opposed to repeating a character's name. But they can also be used to hide something as well, so to deliberately leave out information, perhaps building up a sense of mystery or even tension. Adjectives are really essential to creating precise imagery for fiction and non-fiction texts. They work with nouns to build noun phrases. The writer's choice of adjectives helps to create a particular representation or to reveal their opinion on a topic, whether that's positive, negative, or ambivalent. Your verb choices are also really helpful to exploring language. Quite often, those verb choices might be words that we can zoom in on and explore. So I always like to think about like alternative choices for verbs. Why this specific one? What does it help us to understand what is happening in that moment? A writer's choice of verbs can also convey a particular idea, a representation. As I say, modal verbs can create that degree of certainty or choice. And imperative verbs, we know, give a command. Finally then, adverbs are used for precision. They can tell us where something is happening. They can help to guide a reader through the text, how often, when and where things take place. Okay. Over to you for some practice. Here's an extract, and I have highlighted some of the words here in red. I would like you to spend a little bit of time categorising them, telling me what word classes you can see here. So whether it's a noun, an adjective, a verb, or an adverb. And you might be able to be a little bit more precise as well, whether something is a concrete noun, for example, whether you can spot a modal or an imperative verb. Okay, pause the video and complete that task, and when you're done, you can go to the next slide and mark your answers. Okay, over to you then for self-marking. And through that, you should be able to identify which of the word classes you're most confident with. Okay, if there's a particular word class that you misidentified or were unable to label, that is the one to focus on and to continue revising.